My name is Shanti Devins, and I work for Climate Smart Missoula. We're a local nonprofit that works to build and accelerate climate solutions for Missoula and beyond. And we're so excited to welcome you to Coping with Climate Change, a panel that's exploring mental health in this era that is really heavy that we are living in, and we need to make space for that. So I'm delighted that we are. This is Missoula's second annual Climate Solutions Week. So today, as part of a whole slew of programming, there's still more to come. It is not the end of the week, even though it feels like the end of the week. We have some great programming Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, kind of culminating in this big community bike ride and celebration at Free Cycles. So there is a schedule on the table out there. We'd love to see you at some more events. And there's also a newsletter if you want to stay connected to Climate Smart for when we do activation. And if you want to be more involved, there's a way for everyone to be involved in this. This session is being generously recorded through a grant from MCAT, Missoula Community Access Television. So it's there for you as a resource that you can just be present here and not have to worry about taking notes, and you can go look it up later. I want to thank Britt King. She is a PhD student in clinical psychology at UM. She interned with us this summer and was just so instrumental in making this panel happen and reaching out to our panelists. And I want to thank you for your energy and that. And then we are going to start with another PhD student at UM, Olathe, and she's going to kick us off with an arrival exercise to just ground us in this space. And I'm going to hold anybody who's late at the door so that we cannot have that interrupted, and then I'll let them in after, and then Justin will take us from there. So thank you for being here. It's all you.
Hello, my name's Olathe. I'm currently a clinical psych PhD student, and I come from the Napa region, and I'm pretty involved in climate change research as well, and that's part of my research and my PhD. So, thank you for the invite. So yeah, we're just going to start off with a mindfulness practice, and really quickly, mindfulness kind of originated in different religious practices or spirituality practices, including like within Buddhism, Hinduism, and Taoism, and there's others as well. But Western psychology and mental health has recently recognized it as a helpful practice. And mindfulness overall is more of an awareness process and not necessarily a thinking process. And so it's really being present in the moment without judgment, and more so with curiosity and being curious about you in the present moment, and encourages flexibility in the way that we are present, but also in the way that we think about ourselves as well. So just go ahead and start off, get in a comfortable position. You can close your eyes if you want, or you can leave them open. And just start to breathe. And as you're breathing, just bring awareness to any sensations or thoughts that you're having, and don't necessarily judge them or try to make sense of them. Just be aware that they are there. Try not to get stuck in any thoughts and just let them pass by. Now I want you to bring your focus really specifically on your breathing. So think about your breaths and think about your belly rising and falling. Think about the patterns of your breath and anchor yourself within that. Now I want you to expand that awareness outward. So think about the rest of your body. Think about any sensations that are happening, tightness, any aches, maybe looseness in your body, and just notice them. And as you continue to breathe, if you wish, you can stay in this space or you can expand that awareness outward. So you can open your eyes, look at the environment around you. You can look outside if you want, and bring your awareness there. Instead of focusing on specific things, maybe broaden that awareness and focus on like textures and colors versus placing judgment on a certain thing. And continue being curious about it. Okay, and when you're ready, you can open your eyes, bring yourself back to the space. Thank you. So I think that mindfulness practice is really approachable, and that's why I like it a lot, and that you can do in your day-to-day. But I also like the last element of expanding that awareness outward, because sometimes it's easier to be non-judgmental about things outside of ourselves versus within ourselves, and so it gets that practice going, and it's easy to do out in the wilderness. So, yeah.
Thank you, Aletha. That was wonderful. Yeah. Thanks, everybody, for coming out. Do some brief sort of introductions and get right into the program. My name's Justin Angle. I'm a professor here in the College of Business. I guess because I do an interview show on the radio, I get asked to moderate panels. So here we are. And I see Amy out on the trails all the time. So we have some familiarity there. But it's good to be here. Thank you. So we have a wonderful panel constructed. I'll ask them to introduce themselves with the prompt, when and how did climate change become real to you? When did it become something you felt? Sarah, let's start with you.
Well, I'm going to start by introducing myself, that I'm the daughter of Southeast Alaska, which is a highly animate landscape. I'm the daughter of Aquatuxet, which is the Mendenhall Glacier, the most visited site in Alaska now, and my greatest teacher, a body of ice that has receded over a mile in my lifetime. But I am the daughter also of conservationists, people whose idea of a family vacation was to tour Hanes underwear factories. So I understood ecological debt at a very young age. But 10 days after my 8th birthday, the Exxon Valdez oil spill happened. And if any of you are familiar with Alaska, it's a state 3 times the size of Texas with half the population of Montana. So we're a village. And when something happens to one part of our body, we all respond. So at 8, being sensitive and already a poet, I was attuned to the natural world and the impact humans have in relation to it. But I'll also say that what mitigates my attention to the pain is deep love. So I was a young person knowing about climate change, and also it hasn't affected my ability to love this place.
Okay. My name is Cecilia Spencer. I'm a high school student here in Missoula. My mom, Gwen, is actually here. She's a big part of why I got into this work. Like, a lot of women in my family are really involved in this kind of thing, and I've gotten to be really inspired by my mom in caring about stuff like this. I think the interesting thing about growing up in a time like now is you never had like an aha moment about climate change. It was always just sort of there. Like, you were always like, oh yeah, the polar bears are dying and the rainforest is going away. And I know that sounds incredibly pessimistic, but little kids right now have to cope with a lot more than I think anyone has had to. And it's this interesting duality of having to know all of that stuff and also feeling really helpless about it. And so that's a big part of why I feel like inspired to do this work, is to try to take some of that back and to be able to make changes to some of those things. So.
My name is Dave Morris, and I have really spent my life as much as possible in the outdoors. I've been an outdoor educator, environmental educator, and sort of guide at times since before I left college. And to sort of answer your question, Justin, in the 90s, I was interacting with a lot of high school and junior high students, and climate change was there, but it was sort of one in this sort of thicket of environmental issues. There's extinctions, there's wilderness protection, there's biodiversity loss, there was ozone, things like that. It was just there as one of the things. But then gradually in the 2000s, it started to become clear that this was a kind of a threat multiplier, as our military says it is, that the reach of climate change was reaching into communities and landscapes and ecosystems and cultures and economies everywhere. And it's just that this was a different sort of thing. And, as kind of the representative of environmentalism to public school students, I felt a responsibility to talk about these things and finding ways to do that was more empowering than alarming, more sort of connecting than sort of dissociating, has been kind of a long-term challenge. And most recently, well, for the last 20 years or so, I've been teaching university field courses. So we get undergraduates out and we teach courses on all sorts of conservation, environmental topics, on backpacking and kayaking and cycling trips. And a big part of that is meeting with all of the people along the way, like a really broad diversity of people, from politicians, ranchers, hunters, Native American tribes and elders, environmentalists, just all sorts of people. And through all those eyes, seeing the impacts of climate change as it's been progressing especially over the last few decades. For me personally, the bark beetle epidemic or outbreak, they're a native insect, but they had a really dramatic impact for a while. And just seeing whole forests wiped out from a strong climate signal was really impactful for me personally. So, yeah.
Super. So let's shift to the work that you three do. Sarah, in your clinical practice in particular, how has the salience of climate changed in the years that you've been practicing in the space?
I've been doing this, I've been in the field for almost 20 years, but 2017 was a demarcation when the wildfires in Seeley Lake were breaking air quality monitors. That's when I noticed folks coming in and saying things like, I don't know why I'm just so irritable. I don't know why I'm fighting with my partner all the time. I'm so depressed I can't get out of bed. It was an experience of the threat was actually in the consultation room with us, right? Which is like, you can't ignore it when there's actual smoke in the room. And so that's when I began really processing what it meant to live in this landscape. At the same time, my home glacier was receding at really dramatic rates, and so I was attending to that. And there was luckily a wave in psychology around this conversation. So it's still a very new field, and yet we have, we have psychoanalytic ideas that go back to the 70s. So I joined the stream of conversation and have been with it ever since. And it's been mind-blowing and so fun to be part of a growing community, and also it's heartbreaking.
So Cecilia, in your role as a student, as a peer, and as a budding activist, yeah, how has the salience changed in your life, or yeah, how does it manifest in your world?
I think it's really interesting to think about, for me at least, like, climate change has always been there for me. Like, it's always been something that I've been able to know about and that people around me have been able to explain and articulate. But especially recently, in the past, like, as I've gotten older and in the past couple of years with like all of the smoke that we've seen every year, so bad where you can't go outside, where you can't really do anything, I feel like it's really started to hit people around me. It started to hit me a little bit more. And some days that is really scary. Like some days it just feels like there's not a future in a way. But then other days there are people that really inspire me, like Sarah, like my mom, like the people at Climate Smart who are really inspiring and really cool. And so I feel like it's kind of that choice that I have to make every day to keep on either being paralyzed by it or to be brave and to be hopeful about it. And I know that in my generation, it's really easy to get scared of it and to, instead of like saying you have to be brave and you have to keep going, to kind of freeze and get really rigid. I feel like we see a lot of that in the legislation that gets passed right about now, and in a lot of the policies that people have, and in a lot of the denialism that we see. I also think, though, it's really interesting with like the hurricane that just hit half of the United States and with the fires that hit the other half, to be in that denial. So that's kind of the thing that is always playing in the back of my head, is how could you not see what is going on? But then also I understand how you could how you could choose not to see it, because it is really scary. So I think that's like a big thing that I see, at least in my generation, is this like fight between seeing something and doing something about it, even when it's really hard and feels a little hopeless, or staying in denial and kind of keeping your head down.
Dave, you mentioned your work as an outdoor educator, and over the years, over the many years you've been doing it, the salience of the issue has had to take different forms, I would imagine.
Yeah, I mean, and it's very diverse at any one time. There are people who are super informed and people who have absolutely no idea what's happening or why. But I would say in general, there has been, like, for a long time, just sort of like growing awareness of the issue of climate change for years and years and years. I would say that even in a period where people like Cecilia have been, sort of immersed in climate education in a way for a long time, I found, and I still find, a really surprising degree of, I just have to say, sort of ignorance about how it actually proceeds and what actually is at stake and what the actual effects are and are projected to be. And more than that, just an unawareness of the work that is going on and the progress that is being made. I mean, it's far from anything like enough or quick enough, but there is a lot happening, particularly in the last few years. And it feels like, the progression has been from not really understanding it to it being maybe understood as just kind of this pervasive miasma cloud over everything that you don't really want to talk about in polite conversation, right? And you don't even really want to investigate more to find out what is actually happening and why is it happening. And so I felt I don't know, something that I can do and a role that I've tried to play along with many, many others is to kind of show that when you learn about what's actually happening, it is empowering, and it becomes not this foggy cloud of unknowing, but a lot of particular things that are happening that you can put your fingers on, that you can get your hands around, that you can engage with your community and start doing something about. And that's what I feel like the work is now.
Yeah, you're describing their on-ramps to the topic. And in your experience, are there particularly effective ways that people can learn and then learn in such a way that empowers them to get involved? And because I can see learning information can also be intimidating. You can feel like, oh my gosh, all these experts are way down the road on this and there's no place for me. How do you sort of approach it in such a way that gives people on-ramps to getting involved?
That's a really good question. I feel like one of the ways in is just through connection with people and having conversations about climate issues and just being willing to sort of start up that conversation. I did a bike tour a couple of years ago that was supposed to go to the climate meetings in Scotland, but because of COVID, didn't end up going there. But I talked with I just sort of gave myself the task of talking to everyone I could about climate. And the best way in that I found was to ask them, what do people around here tend to think about climate change? To make it not, what do you think? What are you doing? You know, what do you want? What are you afraid of? But like, what happens around here? And just to find a gentler, kind of less personalized way into the issue. And usually, pretty soon after that, we'd be having a real conversation about climate issues, which in my everyday life is pretty rare as well. So I don't know. I think there are some strategies, there are some ways in like that you know you all can help come up with as well, because I do think that making those connections is really a way to sort of get past that sort of activation energy moment.
So connections and staying relational. I know this is a topic deeply important to you, Sarah. I'd love to get your input, but before we do, Cecilia, talk about your role as a youth. How do you stay in connection and how do you stay relational when there's so many technological forces in your world that are trying to isolate you? How do you make connections, real connections in person with folks around the topic?
If you can't beat them, join them, go to social media. I'm just kidding. Don't do that. No. I think another interesting thing about this is my generation, at least, I think there's a lot of really serious things going on all the time. Like this election is constant, like the election that's going to do them all. But so was last election and the one before that. Like they've all been the one to end the country and to end democracy, and I don't know. And I think that when you're in an environment that is constantly giving you so much like information that it's like the most desperate thing ever, you kind of can tune out of it a little bit, if that makes sense, and it can all start feeling like a joke. And so I think by trying to create ways where it is accessible and ways that people care about, like I love that idea of like asking what do people think around here. And another big one is like asking people, at least for me, like what spaces are important to you, like what places outside do you love that you couldn't lose, and like just helping people feel, I think for me at least, helping people feel like it's an accessible issue even though it's not really comprehensible to anybody, I don't think. And another big way is by introducing people to good mentors, like programs like this, like people like my mom, people like Amy, who can create good content and good ways of learning about this that people can get behind. Honestly, I think a lot of it is finding causes that people can get behind, causes that people feel empowered by, whether that's going outside, picking up trash, getting the air clean. It's just like, it's little things, I think, that pile up and make a big difference. Like if it's just not using a plastic straw every time you go outside, telling people that that's enough really makes them feel good is what I found. Just saying you're doing enough, you're doing your best, like I'm proud of you. That's something I really try to employ, at least in my life, is with my friends, just saying we're doing little things, but they're gonna add up eventually. I know it.
Yeah, a lot of unifying language there. Sarah, how do you think of staying relational in this context? Yeah.
I just want to say that, like, that's enough is a way of fighting shame. And we know that shame is one of the factors that keeps us isolated and prevents us from taking action. I'm going to backtrack because as the psychotherapist in the room, I feel a call of duty to say the human mind is very sophisticated. we developed all the problems we're dealing with, and somehow we haven't figured out how to resolve them. We have psychological defenses for a reason, i.e. denial, justification, yada, yada, yada. I like Sally Weintraub, she's a UK psychotherapist, who says the human mind was never meant to face this kind of existential threat. We can't actually think our way through our own eradication. And so to be kind to ourselves that we don't actually know how to do this yet, even though we've created a world and systems of problems. I was blessed with a catastrophic mind. So anything that you've thought, I have also thought too about how bad it could get. And I find that when I say that, it's comforting for people. It's like, you can't scare me. I've thought it all, and I've heard it all. And also, we do this thing with our minds where we make the future terrifying, and we call that splitting, and we do that in order to make the present safe. And what I can remind you is anything we're fearful about happening is already happening someplace on this planet. And so we don't actually need to split off and make the future terrifying. We can actually feel, we can bring the fear into the present, and we can also feel safe. If we have the luxury of not being in an active state of catastrophe and trauma, it's our privilege and our right to do something with that. So the human mind is complicated. There's a reason not all of us can hold it at the same time, but for those of us who can, we have a responsibility. Relationship is what I deal in. And to me, that's the foundation for all of this, is that we're in real relationship with what's happening outside. We're in real relationship with that mountain and those trees and this air and each other. And that's what I found to be the most effective strategy. And I can speak to that later, but connection, relationship is way more powerful than data in my work.
I'm tempted to ask a follow-up, Sarah, because I've heard in some of Cecilia's answers and some of Dave's comments, this notion of threat state and vigilance, and that has to be a piece of the struggle for many people. It's like, how can you live in a threat state? Can you talk about some of the mechanisms and what the consequences of living in that state are and how it might impede moving forward for folks?
Yeah, we have a stress response system for a reason. It's to get us away from grizzly bears and acute situations, right? Our bodies want to cycle through and sequence through by, bringing our blood back to our extremities and being able to see, not just myopically, and being able to access our executive functioning skills. Folks will come in to me and usually be in an active state of hypoarousal, right, which will look like, I play video games all day, I can't look at the news, I can't think about this, or I smoke a ton of weed, which is becoming more common now that it's recreational in Montana, actually. Or they're in hyperarousal, which is, I can't function, I'm panicking all the time. Every time I see a headline, my nervous system gets frazzled. I'm not sleeping, I'm having trouble eating, I get in fights at the bar when we just are trying to have gentle conversation about the daily news. And so we talk about the window of tolerance or the zone of tolerance, and that just means essentially expanding our nervous system's ability to hold intense stimuli while feeling safe in our bodies. And we can do that. There's lots of great modalities, and I recommend everybody having a therapist or having groups or practices that help you regulate your nervous system. You can do it even right now, is like looking at the tops of trees, right? Raising your vision up regulates your vagus nerve. It makes you feel more optimistic. Isn't that interesting? So that's a practice you can take home with you. But getting our bodies back into regulation is really what we need in order to access our prefrontal cortex and make good decisions going forward.
Thank you for that. These practical tools are really useful. I mean, as an aside, I was in a particularly difficult meeting yesterday, and somebody just reminded me, inhale and then exhale 3 times as long. And I don't know the technical bits, but apparently that helps you avoid fight or flight state. And I just felt like, okay, I can be in this moment and navigate this really hard thing with much more poise. So it's sometimes little things like that help you kind of get your wits about you. Dave, same kind of question to you when you're sort of conducting these group experiences in wild spaces. how do you kind of navigate that space of catastrophe versus wonder versus engagement?
That's a good question, and I think it really depends a lot on who who I'm with and where we are and how I am at the moment. And I don't think I have like one way through that. It's kind of by feel, but I do think that trying to live just on one side of the emotional spectrum doesn't work, right? I've not seen it work for anyone who's overall mentally healthy, right? So by saying it's only okay for me to feel joyful and exuberant is unsustainable. And I find myself, and obviously also it's quite unsustainable to be on the other end of the spectrum all the time. And I think maybe my implicit goal is to try to help people hold those things together as one, and maybe not be so identified with either side of that spectrum, but just to, this is very much a mindfulness kind of practice, but to just see these as like clouds going through the sky of your being, of your mind, and to not be carried away on either side of that spectrum, to remain solid and grounded. And for me, in education, one of the ways of grounding people is to try to share facts and dynamics and history and things that we know have happened, and solidly grounded predictions for what could happen. And I feel like, grounding in that intellectual way is also an important part of it. And I guess the other is just, as we've been sort of talking about, just being grounded in place and in the more than human world it's really critical for me to get out of sort of the hall of mirrors of my own and my community and my media bubbles, thoughts and worries and all that, and to be in a place, and particularly to be there with other people who also love that place.
Yeah, and Dave, as you're recounting that perspective, it reminds me that you're getting people out in these landscapes, moving through them, living in them, very place-based, but also the piece of moving and kind of coming up against some of your own limits and the discomfort involved in that, and the sort of learning that if I don't catastrophize, I might actually be able to make it through this hard physical experience. What are some of the parallels between the physical aspect of your educational experience and the sort of more cognitive bits?
Yeah, well, I think I feel really blessed to be able to sort of teach in the way that I do, but I think that kind of learning and experience is available to lots of people because the outdoors is all around us. But I've thought for a long time that it is a deeply, like on an evolutionary level, a powerful experience for us to move with a small group of people who we know and who we depend on and who count on us, to move with a group like that through, you could say wild, you could say a natural, you could say just to move through the world in that way, just I think gets to the very core of who we are. And I think an important part of that is getting us beyond just being inside our own heads, but being part of a group and being responsible to someone outside of yourself, and feeling that you can count on them and they can count on you, and as well as the place. So I think those kinds of experiences that really tap into the core of who we are just critical, and I think they're rarer and they're harder to come by because our culture doesn't, and our technology isn't encouraging that so much, right? We're supposed to now be like sitting alone in a room with a screen, maybe connecting with other people sitting alone with screens, but if you can be with them physically in the outdoors, that's a whole different thing and way healthier for us, I think.
So folks in the audience who don't know of Sarah's work on the Grounding podcast, recently released by Montana Public Radio, you should check it out by all means. Cecilia, I want to ask you about your appearance with your mother in episode 3. You talked about hope and taking action. What are the role of those two concepts for you? Why is hope important to you first, and then why do you connect that to action?
I think the only way to get through the situation we're in right now is hope. I think that it is probably the most powerful tool that we have to fight climate change, and I think it is the tool that people who are actively opposed to that goal try to utilize and take the most. I think that a big part of the way that I see hope being taken is through all of the language around like the problem being so massive and it being huge and it being something that we can't solve. And I think that that is a really effective tool at getting people to choose apathy and to stop trying. And I think the biggest way that you can combat that and the biggest form of resistance to that is by choosing to care and choosing to take your time and choosing to put your energy towards a goal of making this all better. And so I think my biggest thing is, especially in a generation where it's kind of like, oh, this is your future, like you guys got this, like good luck. And you're always kind of like, what? Like, no. But I think that having hope around that and saying, like, having a lot of optimism around it is a really big way to combat that feeling, at least for me, is by saying, like, there are people that are doing their best. There are people that are trying really hard. There are still really beautiful things in the world. There are still things that are worth fighting for, and like remembering those things in my thoughts and in my actions, that's what helps me, and it's what inspires me, and I think it's what makes all of it possible. But I think it is so hard when there are like big corporations and big political entities that are actively trying to stop you from feeling that, because when you feel empowered and you feel like you got this, oh, you're taking them down, like they're not gonna win. But the second that you start feeling scared and feeling small, you do become small in a way. And so I think by feeling empowered and by staying hopeful, for me, it's the biggest way that you can do something about it, because it makes you powerful.
Wonderful. And Sarah, as one with as you describe, a catastrophic mind, what role does hope play in your own sort of approach and your work as a therapist?
We were joking planning for this meeting that I'm going to be the disruptor of hope. I think I gave up hope a long time ago when I realized the glacier's not coming back. It's actually going to be gone in my lifetime. The thought that the 30,000 tourists that visit my hometown each day that go to the glacier will be struck by its beauty that they will change their behaviors has not turned out to be true. It's an Instagram background for them. I gave up hope around that. What I found I can do is care and love and grieve. Those, to me, are the pathways into this work. I think about gesturing towards decolonial futures. They have this remarkable graphic called the SDMR compass. And the cardinal points are sobriety, responsibility, discernment, and maturity. It is a child's wish to believe and wait for policy or presidents to fix this. We are adults in this room. You get a break. And it's really on us. And to speak to Dave's point about not living on either end of the spectrum, I think the task is not to be in reckless hope, where it's like the perfect policy, or if we just electrify everything, we can make it better. Because what we know is that if we pave over 31 million acres of the western desert, it raises the temperature beneath the solar panels 3 degrees Celsius, which affects sensitive species and flora. Are we willing to face the grief of losing that? There's always a consequence, even when we move towards a path of policy. Neither can we fall into hopelessness, which is nihilism, whateverism, fuck-it-allism, if I can swear. And that the task is to walk the tightrope with intellectual rigor, relational rigor, humility, humor, and self-reflexivity, which means I am aware of what I'm thinking and feeling and doing. That's where I try to exist, is in the icky middle. And I would like to invite you to join me because it's kind of fun. And there's lots of beauty that can be had here.
I want to learn more about relational rigor. What is that?
Well, I'm going to tell you a story about relationship, okay? July 24th, I was sitting on the porch with my spouse eating a pizza, and a wall of dust and wind kicked up and flipped the box over. And it became clear to us that the night was not going to be usual. We ran inside, and I watched the storm from the window, and across the street, an electrical box broke loose and sparks were flying, and immediately a 10-foot wall of flames was in my neighbor's yard. I yelled, "Fire," and my spouse said, "Call 911," and I did, and guess who was not available? So the parental safety I relied upon wasn't accessible, and so my spouse ran into the storm, and a bucket brigade of neighbors put a fire out, which could have caused a wicked storm like in Colorado. I was busy getting our valuables and my pet, and I was so struck by neighbors with kegs, empty kegs filling water, put the fire out. The next morning, I got on my bicycle and rode to my friends' houses to see if they were okay. And a preschool of 3- and 4-year-olds walked by, and the instructor said, "We're here seeing who needs help." And I thought, what are 3- and 4-year-olds gonna do? But we started talking, and they said, "My dad is so worried we're gonna lose the elk in our freezer." And I said, "I'm so worried about my ice cream and my huckleberries." And then one child said, "I love huckleberry ice cream." And so what I'm saying is that it's us relying on each other that's going to make this work, right? It was our neighborhood that put out this fire. It was connecting with children about fear and loss and grief that were able to move something very scary into something joyful and playful again. And so that's what I mean by relational rigor, is leaning on each other, going out into the storm, holding each other. Our neighbors across the street came over with drinks later that night, and they just wanted to talk about it. "Did you see? Could you believe that branch caught me by the hair?" And all we did was witness and listen. And that is powerful.
Yeah, I would imagine all of us are recounting our own experiences on July 24th. The moment you talked about the dust wall, I was like, oh yeah, I remember that night. Dave, talk about hope in your space and your relationship to it, and how it manifests with the students on your trips.
Yeah, I guess think what I said before about, well, one thing I've learned over time of being with groups is, like, especially when I started, a group would be going along fine, and then they'd like hit like some sort of weird rough patch, and I had no idea why. They suddenly seemed to hate each other and hate me and hate where we were, and they were, maybe not hate's too strong, but they were, just like not into it anymore. And I would go into like entertainer mode, and I'd like start leaping around and like coming up with like activities, and
Dad
we
jokes.
got to do this, and if we got a game we're gonna play, it's gonna be great. And those things would also usually fall flat into the morass of the group mood, and just kind of discredit me as a leader in some ways. And I realized that if there wasn't something fundamentally off about the group dynamic, that this was just something that was going to come and go. And sometimes it would stick around for longer than I would have liked, like a day or more. But then there'd be some random little thing would happen, like a mouse would run across someone's boot, and it would just like flip the whole mood, and everyone would like start laughing and be in a totally different mood. And I started to see, moods and emotions kind of a bit more like, well, they come and go, and you enjoy the ones you like when they're there, but don't get too stressed out about the tough spots at the same time. And that sort of folds into it's a very academic sort of a concept that we've ended up teaching a lot about, is systems thinking, which I know is a big part of psychology. It's a big part of lots of realms of academia, and here we are at a university. So complex interactive systems like behave in very unpredictable ways. And, you know, science in some ways has taught us to like expect kind of linear outputs. Like you do this, you know, you put fertilizer on the crop and it grows this much. So you put twice as much fertilizer, it should grow twice as much. You put three times as much, right? And we're surprised when it stops working, or when the pesticides we're applying, you know, stop working because the complex adaptive system has reoriented itself, and now those pesticides don't work that way, or the fertilizer has caused something else to grow that you didn't want to grow, or, you know, like all these surprises. And we often put these in negative terms, that surprises often are sort of negative, but they're not only negative, right? Like there are positive surprises too. And part of when I see people, students especially, who are kind of in the climate doomerism world, I think it's often because they've seen things moving in a certain direction, and they've been told things are moving in a certain direction, and our linear thought mind kicks in and says, oh, well, it's just going to keep going like that until it's just hell on earth, right? But that's generally not the case. Like systems don't behave that way, usually. And there are lots of pleasant surprises that happen as well, and necessary surprises. And so I think part of what I try to put out to students is to not be certain of the convictions they have, either about the climate system or about the political systems or about, you know, our culture or how ecologies are going to respond. Like, be open, be willing to be surprised, be willing to see the good things that happen as well as the sort of negative tipping points that trip us up.
Yes, you can't learn what you already know. Cecilia, you mentioned apathy a few moments ago, and you know, in your school, in your community, how do you sort of help people break through apathy or help them turn away from it?
I think apathy for me is, especially in high school, it's a lot of like, oh, it was lame anyways. Like, it's kind of a lot of that energy, which I think is funny. But I also think that people deep down really like caring about stuff. Like, once they find their thing, like, everybody has their thing and they love it so much. And right now, everybody's thing, like, everybody has something that is being affected by climate change that you love deeply and that you care about deeply. And sometimes just reminding people that this issue touches every part of their life in some way and everyone in their life in some way, it can really help snap people out of it and make it feel more personal. Because I think when it's a someone else issue that's happening to someone else in some other part of the world, it's a lot easier to just kind of not care about. But when it is in your backyard and when it is affecting you personally in your everyday life, it is a lot harder to feel like it's kind of not important. So I think like a lot of things like the fires that we see every year, it helps snap people out of it a little bit. At least for me, like I've seen people kind of get real, wise up a little bit and go, oh, okay, this is important and this is something I should care about. And I think the next step to that, from that like awakening, is to then realize that you have to do something about it. Like, you can do something about it, and that you have an obligation to the people who are not able to do something. Like all the adults here, I can't vote. You guys should, though. Like, it's things like that where you have to realize that you have an obligation and a privilege to be able to do something, so you have to go do it then. And I think that that's where people tend to get tripped up, is when it actually comes to the doing. But I think by creating accessible pathways into activism, if that's what you want to call it, even some people don't want to call it activism, if just creating accessible pathways to do something is like what I've seen the next step to be, is helping people realize it's a problem that's affecting them, that's personal, and then finding personal ways to help and to pitch in.
I love that. It's cool to care about things. Yeah, but caring about things can be intimidating.
Yeah.
You know, it can scare people away. Have you experienced that? You care deeply about something? Have you seen both sides of that? As it can attract people, but it can also make people uncomfortable?
I think politics right now is kind of one of those things, like, you don't want to go into a social situation and be like, sit down, you guys, and you know what we're going to talk about right now? The political situation. Like, nobody wants to do that. And it's things like that. And honestly, climate has become so politicized. I don't know why it's a political issue. It is an everybody issue from all sides of the spectrum, from all sides of the ticket. It affects everybody, whether you're a Democrat or a Republican or an independent. But I think that it's issues like that, and I think that's a really big tool of the people who benefit from these systems and from climate change, is making it a polarized issue that you can't talk about, that is really sensitive to some people, that is going to be really upsetting to some people, really, like, people feel really passionate about it. So I know, like, at least in, like, at my school, like, there's not a lot of people that sit down and, like, have talks about, like, politics and about climate change, just because it is such a hard issue to talk about. I think that is a big tool of this situation, is making it a really hard issue. So I think a big way to combat that is finding little entrees, like, what do people think about this? How do you feel about this? Like, what is important to you that you want to protect? Finding ways to make it feel less scary for people, to make it feel accessible and easy, so then people can care about it in a way that doesn't feel lame.
I love that. Sarah, we've talked about a variety of sort of, I don't know if contrast is quite the right word, but maybe concepts that sit potentially in opposition and holding both of those at the same time. And it makes me think of gratitude and anguish. There's real loss that we're feeling and experiencing, but there's so much to be so grateful for. I mean, just look outside the window tonight. I mean, we live in this beautiful space and we all have connection to it. How do you sort of navigate those two concepts in your work?
I'm going to be the chief brand officer for grief tonight. I would invite you to join me. David's mentioned this too, is like there are positive and difficult climate emotions. Panu Pikula, the Finnish researcher, speaks to this. It's really important when we talk and think about climate crisis, we also connect with awe and wonder and surprise and love. Not just shock, shame, despair, hopelessness. I bring up grief because it's the other side of love. That I think about. William Worden came up with a grief model that was adapted for climate change by Roe Randall. I'm saying these names because they are my teachers. I'm not saying them to exclude you. I'm saying them because they deserve honoring. And the first step is to understand intellectually what's happening. The second would be to understand and let it move through emotionally. The third is adapting to it, right? What does it mean to shift and adapt? And the fourth is to reinvest emotional energy. So when I think about apathy and care, right, that in some ways we have to ride the wave of this in order to get back into investing. Grief is unavoidable. It's unavoidable. Whether we lose things due to the climate crisis or we make changes, I can tell you this from personal experience. What does it mean to not fly home to Alaska as often as I wish? What does it mean to say, I love the Mission Mountains, but that's 4 hours of a carbon footprint for me, and I haven't been able to afford an electric car. So I hike this mountain until I'm bored out of my mind. And also, hiking this mountain makes me so familiar with every twist and turn, every sagebrush, every mountain bluebird that shows up. And so I'm inviting you into the conversation of grief because it's unavoidable and because it connects us to our love.
Dave, your perspective on these two emotions, essentially anguish and gratitude. How do you balance them in your own work, but also witnessing these sensations in your students?
Yeah, I would echo what you were saying about grief is unavoidable, and I think it also needs to be honored. And particularly honored with other people, I think. My own experiences of grief are things that I couldn't really hold just on my own. And I was thinking about gratitude, and I think I was just looking back over some of the the courses that I've taught, particularly on climate and energy issues, and I feel this gratitude towards some of the people we have met with for decades now. Well, not decades on that course, but 15 years. Alexis Bonagovsky in Billings is a woman who took on, okay, we talked about sort of like these sort of projected certainties of what's going to happen. Big corporations, big capital wanted to develop coal fields near Otter Creek, south of Billings, near the Northern Cheyenne Reservation. And they wanted to build a railroad to get that coal out and to get it out to the coast, and to build big coal transshipment terminals to get that coal to China and Korea and India and Japan. And it just looked like that was going to happen. That was the projection that almost everyone was making. But people like Alexis and other friends I have who are on the coast were just not going to sit down and just let that roll over them. And Alexis fought for 10 years, devoted her life to stopping those coal leases from going through, and they were stopped. And the coal transshipment ports that were projected up and down the West Coast, from Oregon to British Columbia, were stopped by activists. And I think it's really inspiring to me, and I think it's inspiring to students too, to see real examples where people made a commitment. It was uncertain. They easily could have failed, but they made the commitment and they did the work piece by piece, bit by bit, and they made a tremendous difference. And so I feel tremendous gratitude both for their work, but also for their example and for their willingness to share that with students and upcoming generations who I think can be inspired by, by the work that previous generations have done to preserve as much as has been done. It hasn't been nearly enough, but a lot of amazing work has been done, and we can learn from that work and feel a lot of gratitude for it.
Cecilia, how do you think about gratitude? I've talked to some young people, interviewed some of the kids on the Held v. Montana case, and one of the sentiments, they were undaunted by the world that older generations have left them. They had some great gratitude for the world as it is. How do you kind of cope with the world as it is in terms of gratitude, but also feeling obligation, as you mentioned before?
I think that the gratitude creates the obligation in a way. Like, being grateful and loving a place, it makes you want to protect it, and it makes you feel like that drive to keep it beautiful in a way. So I love this place. Like, this is where I'm from. This is where my mom's family is from. This is where my grandma is from. So a long line of people that are from here, and I love this place so much. I feel really lucky to get to live here, and I think that love, it helps create this desire to keep it safe for people, for like my little cousins, for my little sister. If I ever have kids one day, like, I want them to be able to look at this place and see the beauty and see all of like the good things. And I think it's that feeling of gratefulness and of love that like that is what I'm working for in a way, because you can't work for a fear, if that makes sense. Like, you can't work because you're scared of something. You have to work because you love something. So you have to step into that feeling of joy and of gratitude of a place and of people. I'm really grateful for all the people that have inspired me, like all of my family members, all of the teachers that I've had that have really showed me ways to do things like this and ways to care about things, because that is really what keeps me connected and keeps me invested in this work. So.
Thank you. So we've been talking a lot up here. We want to sort of transition away from that, let others talk, and we have a bit of an exercise planned for that. Sarah's going to guide us through it. But one of the big themes of our preparations for this was thinking of ways to bring your gifts forward. So that's going to be a theme of this next phase. Sarah, you want to guide us through it?
Yeah, and I also want one final thought, which is gratitude to you and your mom, Gwen Langford, for talking with me about reciprocity and reciprocal care, because that's when it shifted for me, from losing a glacier to understanding the question of what is my responsibility to the glacier. That's how we get the work done. So I'm going to ask you to be brave, using Cecilia's word, brave tonight, to use some relational rigor, to get to know your neighbor, and to answer these questions. And I'll remind you what they are, but we'll give you the overview. Why are you here tonight? What brought you here tonight? What do you love too much to lose? And what are the gifts you can bring forward to meet this moment? We'll give you a few minutes. Listen well. Speak with intention. Anything else?
I think that's it. And feel free to move around. There's lots of space in the foyer. We'll reconvene in maybe 5 or 10 minutes around this.
Can you repeat the prompts one more time?
Yeah, Sarah has such a more beautiful voice than I, but I have the mic, so why did you come tonight? What do you love too much to lose? And how can you bring your gifts forward into action?
So just one-to-one?
Yeah, one-to-one, groups of 3.
Yeah.
Should we not be with people we know? Is that what you?
Yeah.
Making friends is cool, everybody. No,
All right, folks, let's try to figure out what your gifts are, and we'll come and talk about them. How's that sound? And thank you in advance for everybody for engaging in this exercise, the mindfulness practice. All of these bits are maybe things you might not have expected showing up to a panel event, and engaging in it takes some courage and some good spirit and a lack of apathy. So I think we are grateful for your engagement in it. So no obligation to share, but if anybody wants to share any of your answers to those 3 questions, we'd love to hear some sentiments.
I turned to my partner and realized we didn't even recognize each other. We've known each other for almost 40 years. I worked at the Montana Eye Bank for Paul. He was a boss when I was in graduate school the first time here in Missoula. So we had a great conversation.
We kind of caught up more.
40 years to catch up on. That's great. Okay. That's relational. Yes.
I'll break the ice for everyone.
Thank you. Do you want the mic?
Can everyone hear me? I can project. So, first question of like, what was the first question? Why are we here? Sorry. Well, I do work similar to, or related to climate stuff. So, it feels near and dear. And then, like we got on the topic of like who we do this work for, or like, why, or why we show up. And for me, I wrestled with this a lot when I was in college, because there was a lot of like doom and gloom that happened in my classes. And I think for me, especially before this work, I was doing anti-poverty work. For me, it was always this struggle of like, am I protecting a place, but I really care about people? And so trying to kind of wrestle with that. And for me, it was like, I'm protecting a place because people exist in this place and they have relationships with this place. And then gifts that I bring. Amy was part of my job interview a couple months ago or a few months ago, and answering the question of like why I was good for the position that I'm in is, I've been told, I don't know if I fully believe this, but I've been told that like I can show up with humility, and I don't come off as a very proud person. Like I have pride in myself, but I'm never going to come into the room and say,
I know exactly what I'm talking about, and you should listen to me. I try to bring people into the conversation and try to find common ground. I don't think it's ever about trying to like prove someone wrong or this whole like gotcha moment. I think we see that sometimes in the media with climate of like, you know, you're talking about like these linear projections and like if you just do X, Y, Z, you're gonna get here. And so just, yeah, the gift of humility, lack of pride, and the ability to kind of bring people in. I think we're all here because we want to connect with each other. I think we've talked about that a lot with your, you know, what you call it, relational rigor. Yeah, I think that's really important, is making those connections with others, whether you fully agree or not. It's just, there's always some type of common ground that you can end up at, and you should embrace the world as trying to seek that common ground and find it with each other.
Thank you. Yes.
Why I came, I guess, to maybe express myself, because I've been in probably several hundred climate meetings in the past 4 or 5 years, and I can't think of one time where we've sat down and looked at each other and said, what are your fears? What are your anxieties? And really go heart to heart. It just hasn't happened. And so talking about it with the general public, but not talking about it within ourselves, from my experience, is difficult. So as one of the two, I think, baby boomers in here, and I'll say it, I think our generation has had the easiest generation of any generation in this world has ever had. I mean, we were born after World War II, basically. We have not had any major wars. Vietnam was a big blip on the screen. And one of the things that's made it the way we are was fossil fuels. And I find too that people, part of the fear that I experience, and I think a lot of people experience, but they don't talk about it, is that fear of giving up fossil fuels, which Susan just mentioned. When she gets on the airplane, you know, go to see different people, it's this anxiety. But people who don't understand climate change don't have that fear, but they feel that people are saying, you gotta give up fossil fuels. That this is what made us who we are today. I mean, nothing in here was created without fossil fuels. And so, going forward, what kind of gift I can give is just my heart.
What's your name? What's your name?
Paul.
Paul. I'm just going to do a group therapy intervention. Is just notice what it was like for you to have an older white gentleman in the room say what he just said. I felt repair. Like, take it in, really take it in. Thank you, that was a gift.
Yeah. Who's next? Yes.
I can be the other baby boomer.
Tell me too.
There's water.
They're multiplying.
I assure you, we are not multiplying. I'm here to sustain hope, especially for younger people. I don't anticipate living to see the biggest parts of these crises, and I grieve for that. The thing that I cannot give up easily is my love of the high country forests, the alpine larches, the whitebark pines, which we have already almost lost, and I grieve for that too. And I can write, I can take pictures, and I talk with people. The concrete gift that I've been able to give the last couple of years is helping with an effort to plant rust-resistant whitebark pine seedlings in the wild country. 2 weeks ago, I was able to see 11 4-year-old whitebarks that are absolutely precious, 12 inches tall, bushy, and with no sign of blister rust infection. This just was a huge blessing to me to spark more hope. I have no illusion that planting 11 whitebark pine seedlings will restore the millions of trees that have been lost, but it's a spark for hope. And that's why I'm here.
Anyone else? No? The pressure doesn't feel right.
But if your heart's beating in your throat, it's you.
Dave?
I just have a story of another person who we've met with for at least 20 years. A couple, Wilbur and Elizabeth Wood, they live north of Billings. And Wilbur was from the little town of Roundup originally. They moved back there. They were like theater kids in San Francisco. And they moved back to Roundup, Montana, and became like environmental activists in the 60s. And they were theater people, so and they thought that renewable energy was really the way to go. So they created a road show, a road theater production that traveled all over Montana and the Northern Plains, like dramatizing and just publicizing like renewable energy as like this variety comedy traveling theater show. And they did that for years. And then they came back and they started a couple of organizations. They helped start the Northern Plains Resource Council and the ARROW, the Alternative Energy Resources Organization. And they just kept going and doing the work all the time. And the analogy I came up with for the students was that they were like surfers who were like out, just beyond the break, and they're just constantly working to be in the right place. And then when the right wave comes, they just go like hell and get up on the board and surf. And you get something done for a while, and they know it's going to end, but they know that they're going to go back out and they're going to be working to be in the right place to surf again. And I just feel like their example of persistence and joy and just hard work was so inspiring. And I guess I feel a responsibility to share stories like that from just really wonderful people.
Thank you. I guess as we close, we should thank Shanti. Thank you for the invitation, the opportunity. Amy, thank you to you and your organization, your colleagues for all the work you do in the community and beyond. Thanks to MCAT for supporting the broadcast of this. We did our best with the mics. I'm failing brutally at that right now. And then I have to say thank you to Sarah, to Cecilia, and to Dave. I mean, we talked about what we were going to talk about, but I might have gone further with some of the personal questions. And it takes a lot of courage to speak about your experiences and emotions in any context, particularly in front of folks that you don't know. So thanks for doing that, and thanks for. And then to sort of beat Dave's metaphor story to death, yeah, maybe you felt something today, and hopefully it creates a little bit of a wave or the vision of a wave in your life, and you can ride that to whatever's next. Thanks for being here.